I came across this story today from something called The Voice of Europe, and it says Swedish party wants to deport at least 500,000 migrants as integration completely fails. The Alternative for Sweden party wants to return at least 500,000 migrants, its party leader Gustav Kasselstrand told SVT News. I don't think that's probably, I don't believe it's probably like an overt lie, but this seemed pretty extreme to me. I'm like, I don't know if there's people in Sweden who really want to do that. That sounds like fake news. So I pulled up this site, Media Bias Fact Check, which I also don't know how unbiased or objective this site might be. However, they say that Voice of Europe is extreme. So there's source and questionable. And they're in the extreme side of questionable. It says they are biased towards the extreme right, propaganda, conspiracy, and anti-Islam. And I'm like, there it is. It's probably one of those sites. Be careful when you go to that site. But in seeing that, I said, okay, they could, by all means, they can claim that. And they do link to Freer Todd. I think what's the website? They link to Freer Teeter. I'm not sure what I think Freer Teeter is considered like a right-wing site or something like that. So I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying, you know what? I don't want to use a source like this. It's probably hyper-partisan, hyper-focused, and Media Bias Fact Check says it's pretty questionable. I gotta say, if Media Bias Fact Check is gonna call an organization questionable that's considered on the right, I'm not too concerned with it being a conspiracy site, but this might have a left-wing bias. So anyway, I'm gonna throw that all out the window and say maybe you guys Google and check it out. But I decided to look into where Sweden's at now on the migrant issue. And sure enough, we see this. 6 out of 10 voters in Sweden want fewer refugees. Poll. Before I hop into this, I want to point out I have some merch. This is my favorite shirt I designed. It's the Death of Censorship. Forgive me for promoting the merch, but the merch, helps me do my work. And other than that, I'm really proud of this design because I made it. And I've got some other shirts. This is the knocked over Illuminati pyramid with the motto for the US Office of Censorship. And then I've got another one that I'm really proud of. It's Liberals Get the Bike Lock Too. Designed all of it. You got the revolution fist holding a bike lock. And this is all about liberals getting their bike locks so they can ride their bikes and start a green revolution to help save the planet from climate change. That's what it means. But, when you buy merch, it helps me, so that's why I plug the merch. Thanks for all your support, everybody who bought the shirts. I hope you like them. And let's get back to the story. I don't want to waste your time. 60% of voters want Sweden to take in fewer refugees than it currently does, according to an opinion poll. Now, this is the local.se. And as far as I know, the local.se is actually pretty reputable. I'm not entirely sure because I went to Sweden last year. I don't know a whole lot about their news organizations for the most part, but this is from April. So this story is pretty new. 41% said they would prefer significantly fewer refugees to be accepted, while 19% said they would take a slightly lower number. 12% answered that they think Sweden should accept more refugees than it currently does. That's interesting. When the same survey was conducted in 2015, prior to the peak in refugee arrivals, in Europe later that year, 36% said they would like to reduce the number of refugees taken in by Sweden, compared with 26% who said they would increase the figure. This is a dramatic change, not least because it happened so quickly. Mary Demker, professor in political science at the University of Gothenburg, told Dagens Nyheter, the impression of the effect of immigration on Sweden has also changed in the newest poll. So that's interesting, and this is from April. I can't say I'm surprised, because when I was in Sweden, I was inundated with messages from people saying the problem is real, the crime is bad, and the government won't do anything about it. And a lot of people are scared of these hate speech laws, where they'll get arrested and charged for speaking out against it. In one instance, in more than one instance, a large newspaper was actually going to people's houses because people had commented anonymously on the internet saying things like we should get less migrants. And so people are scared. It doesn't mean everybody, it doesn't mean all the time, it doesn't mean most people. It just means that these people do exist. And the people I spoke to, they were like regular people. I wasn't meeting with neo-Nazis or anything crazy like that. I was meeting with like regular people who worked at the supermarket who are like, I'm concerned about this. No one's doing anything about it. So I got another story up here. In depth, the shifting sands of Sweden's immigration debate. And this is a recent story from Lee Roden of The Local. And again, as far as I know, The Local's pretty legit. I'm pretty sure they're all over Europe. This one says, The Local's Sweden in Focus series looks at the shift in Sweden's immigration debate since the dawn of the refugee crisis. Starts with, in 2014, Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt's speech calling on Swedes to open their hearts to asylum seekers could have been read as just another chapter in Swedish openness to immigrants. 4 years on, it is far more difficult to imagine a leader of the country's biggest parties using the same rhetoric in their efforts to win the 2018 election. It's really interesting. Europe, okay, so we've got Italy, Spain, France, and now even Angela Merkel. They're all sort of doing a 180 on the immigration issue. For the longest time, we were seeing wave after wave of economic migrants coming from Africa into Europe. I am not talking about refugees. Refugees come from what's called the Eastern Mediterranean route, and they're coming from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Most of them come from Syria for obvious reasons, but many come from Afghanistan and Iraq as well. The Central Mediterranean route, which is Libya, is primarily people from Nigeria, and some other countries, I believe Sudan, Mali. The numbers have changed since last year, but we saw a lot of these NGOs going to the Libyan coast, grabbing these ships. They would take these rickety boats and loading people up on these NGO ships and bringing them to Malta and Italy. For the longest time, it was allowed, and there were a lot of activists on the right saying this is not okay because they're effectively supporting these human traffickers. And the craziest thing now is that not only has Italy elected a new guy, Salvini, who's basically like, ports closed. Spain is closing their ports. They're saying, hell no, we're not going to be the safety net for Europe. France, Emmanuel Macron said, these NGOs are breaking the rules and they're feeding into the hands of smugglers, and even Angela Merkel has agreed to some reforms, kind of maybe not necessarily a 180, but it seems like the debate has shifted. Now we're seeing something similar from Sweden. Moderate PM Reinfeldt's summer 2014 speech came in a year when an increasing number of refugees were looking to Sweden and its generous asylum policies for shelter. 12 months later, the full scale of just how many there were heading north was evident, culminating with a record 160,000 people applying for asylum in the Nordic nation in 2015. So I'm gonna try and skip down to see exactly what this shift is about. There's been a dramatic shift in the discussion in the last 4 years. 2014 is remembered for Reinfeldt's Open Your Heart speech, but what primarily marked that election was that the establishment parties wanted to avoid discussing the immigration and integration issue. 2018 is the first election where immigration-related questions take center stage in the debate, he tells Local. And that's from Andreas, I believe that's from Andreas Johansson Heine. Sorry, my Swedish is not acceptable. So, the change in asylum policy approach in 2015 didn't have much to do with SD. I believe they're talking about the Swedish Democrats, Social Democrats. So, the Social Democrats, as my understanding, are like kind of the majority party. They're like the Democrats in the US. But then you have like the Swedish Democrats that are considered to be more like alt-right, even though they're kind of not, but, you know, Sweden's so far left, it kind of is. In the story, they say, there is research which suggests people are generally more positive towards immigration from parts of the world they believe to be culturally or ethnically closer to their country, that there is a difference in attitudes towards culturally remote or culturally close immigrant groups. It remains to be seen whether today's immigrants will achieve the same and leave history absolving Reinfeldt's optimistic approach, or if the opposite will occur, and the more cautious approach of 2018 is vindicated. Either way, the debate on immigration in Sweden will certainly shift again in the future. The past has proven as much. I was called like an enemy of the people or something like that. I can't remember exactly what they said, but there was an op-ed that said that I was a dangerous figure coming and disrupting Sweden or something to that effect. But I will say, apparently I've had some effect on the discourse in Sweden by coming. Maybe not huge, but I did go on television. There was a big hubbub. All the people were interviewing me about it. And I found something interesting. I messaged, so when we were there, one of the things we wanted to do was make sure our approach was balanced. And so I messaged somebody, I think actually Emily messaged somebody who was an integration official. There was an individual of Middle Eastern descent who helped migrants and refugees integrate into Sweden. This was a person I thought was going to be a far lefty and talk about how they can do this and the refugees are good people. However, when they emailed us back, they said that people in Sweden don't want to integrate. They hate Sweden. They hate Swedish food. They hate the language, and they don't want to be here. It's impossible for, it's very difficult for them to integrate, and I was shocked to read it. There's a lot of stuff that happened in Sweden that didn't make the cut because we were doing a video every single day, and we were trying to make sure that I was being fair. You know, there was additionally someone we interviewed who was on the far left who claimed that white supremacists were burning down buildings. We didn't use that either. So there was some more extreme left and right stuff that we kind of avoided just for the sake of we didn't have enough time. But I'm not surprised to see that there is kind of a shift happening now. 6 in 10, what is the other story? 6 out of 10 voters in Sweden want fewer refugees. Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised. But I've got another story here. And this one's from, maybe I shouldn't even, I'll do this one lightly, because I want to make a point not about this story, which is ridiculous, but about Sputnik. Migrant in Sweden fined after exposing penis to, I'm just going to say child. Sputnik and RT have been very, very anti-refugee on Sweden, and it's very strange to me. It's very, very strange. In researching the story, I found this story from Sputnik, and I wasn't going to include it, but I decided, you know what? I don't know why this story is particularly relevant. It's anecdotal. It's a single incident. There are many stories we've heard. There has been an increase in crime and sex-related incidents in Sweden from refugees, but it's not that much. You know, there are crimes from children of migrants from 20 years ago, but those are internal Swedish issues at this point. Refugees are committing certain sex acts, but it's not, you know, relative to Sweden, it's bad. Relative to the rest of the world, it's actually not that high. In my opinion, any crime needs to be, you know, looked at and solved. And in this instance, yeah, you know, finding this person, he probably deserved something worse than a fine. But the point I'm trying to make is a lot of people assume things to be a lot worse than they really are. But the reason I bring this up is simply because it seems like Sputnik has an axe to grind against Sweden. It kind of worries me. Because I don't understand why, and I see these stories and I'm like, they really try hard to paint Sweden in a negative light. In fact, RT and Sputnik tried really, really hard to get footage from me from Sweden, and I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't give it to him, I wouldn't offer up to him. Look, man, whether or not you believe in the Russian collusion stuff, I'm not gonna get involved, all right? I know people who work at RT, and I said you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't work at RT. And it's not to say that RT lies or these people are bad people or anything like that, just that we've got an actual situation in this country. I believe there is I know a lot, when it comes to the Russia stuff and Mueller and Trump, I don't know. You know, I think Ben Shapiro put it well. Let the investigation do its thing. If we see the evidence, impeachment should be on the table. I'm like, I agree. I'm not going to assume I know whether Trump did or didn't do something. I personally lean towards the story seems a bit extreme and far-fetched, but I absolutely recognize things have happened and things are questionable. So I try to avoid it. But I just want to point out, you know, kind of how weird it is that Sputnik and RT are really, really, specifically, that RT will rag on people like Sargon and Dankula and call them alt-right and insult them and try and damage their reputations, but then kind of agree with more far-right individuals on Sweden and migration. So anyway, it is what it is. I've got one final video that you really should check out. It's going to be up in just a couple minutes on this channel. Stay tuned.